I'd like to call this special meeting of the Board of Trustees for the Palm Springs Public Library to order and have our city librarian call roll, please.
Okay, Ed McBride,
Present.
Harry Courtwright,
Present.
David Kelly is absent, and Kathy Warmick.
Present.
And the agenda was posted on or, well, as required by law.
Okay.
I don't have the date.
Our first point is public comment, if we have any public comment. Okay. Moving along, this meeting was called because as you all know, we have been spending since late January working on a new strategic plan for the library, and this is our opportunity to present to our liaisons and to Mr. Reddy. So we're very excited that we're here at this point. It feels like it's taken a long time, and it really hasn't, if you think about it. But it's been a lot of work, and I think that you all will be very pleased with the end product. So what we thought is that we would go through the plan and kind of talk about how we got to where we are, review the plan, and then talk about the next steps. By the way, as you should know, the consultants do know that you guys may have the right to change something. You may want to modify or make comments or add something. So we'll take those notes, and before we call it the final, it would be, of course, with your review and approval. Assuming that the next steps would be for you all to present that ultimately, I guess, to the full council. If there's further changes, the consultants are available to make that for us. So in your packet, you should have a copy, and it probably will have final draft just for that purpose. I have a special version which is highlighted so that I can see the changes that are going through. So that's why you may see one over here with yellow on it, because we've been tracking input along the way, so we know where each of the input has come from through the process. I think that it goes without saying that the three of you were there that day at the convention center, and I still am amazed to think that we had over 70 people from the community that really felt passionate about spending the day with us going through this plan. And as you know, we spent all day really thinking, I think, as high as we could about what we think the library should be doing and where we should be going. And we set out with, I think, a really good basic plan as a result of that. One of the things that I should back up and tell you that this is my third year as a trustee. In year two, I brought to the attention of the rest of the trustees that our strategic plan was dated. And it was about the time that we had been presented with a couple of options to select an architect to update the current library. I raised the question, just from my years of experience and also from Harry's working in libraries, that before we spend this kind of money, should we not take a moment and look at what all of our options are? And more importantly, is the plans that we're talking about, does it meet the needs of the community, first and foremost? So I suggested this process at that time, and we formed a committee. And the committee then went about working with the city. We went through the procurement process to select the consultants, and we also decided that the trust fund should pay for the cost of this, because it's exactly what that money is for, is to help us move forward with planning. So we used trust fund. We negotiated very good. We actually saved a little money out of the budget in our negotiation with the consultants, and decided to kick it off, of course, at that meeting in January, which is where we had a planning committee, which, by the way, is on hold. I say that because that was members of the community that we pulled together to help us come up with that list, and we want to get back to them after you guys give us feedback to let them know where we are in this process. But we sat in a room one day, and we just listed all the people that we thought should be in the room, and it went on for sheets of paper. And then we invited everyone, and guess what? They all showed up. So I think with few exceptions, people who just couldn't make it, And as a matter of fact, I bumped into Arlene Rosenthal the other day at an event, and I said, "We missed you." She said, "I'm so sorry, Ed. I promise the next time I'll be there." I said, "We really need you there because one of the topics was an area where we need your expertise, for example." So I don't think we're quite done yet, but I think that we're kind of on our way to making this a final document. So I will pause there and see if anyone, sure, if anyone has any comments about the process so far, Jeannie, staff, or if you guys have questions for us.
I was just going to say that we are very supportive of this strategic plan, and we've already taken some of the steps that have been suggested. So we're ready to roll, and we think it's a good plan.
If you look at that.
Yeah, Jeannie, I think that this draft is not the final draft.
Well,
So
can we
it
work
should-
with it? Is
I-
that something we can,
Maybe we can get copies of what was changed.
okay. Yeah, I was just, this is just what the consultant sent.
She must not have sent the most current version.
Okay.
So we need to get a current version. I guess what I can do is,
They're not major changes.
I'll just insert them as we kind of go
Is
through.
the yellow and blue highlighted one the most current one?
Yes.
I can run and get a copy.
Or if you want to share a copy of it across the table, then we can huddle around this one over here if you want
Okay.
to.
We can go get a copy, or,
So
yeah.
the January meeting left us with, as you guys know, a pretty big base of content that was then whittled down. And the next process was for us to finalize with the consultants. And I had committed to the foundation board and to the Friends board that to get their support before anything went any further, that they would have input. So I met with them individually. I gave them the draft, and I said, "You have so long to come back to us with your changes." They did that, so we had a meeting where they came back with a couple of tweaks, which ended up in what you now see as we call the yellow and blue version. And we took that and brought to this board. This board asked for I think we had a month to review it and to make sure that all the changes were there from the previous meeting so far. And we actually accepted this on our last meeting, which was the middle of April, right? April, I want to say the 18th.
18th.
Yes. So that's kind of the journey we have made so far. Also, what you might want to know, though we're not here to really necessarily discuss this, is the consultants did an assessment of the library program. And that was basically their professional view of some of the things that we would want to be aware of, especially as we look at budgets and look forward to any other changes to the program. And they basically said, in current public libraries, here are some trends, here are some weaknesses that we see, here are some strengths that we see. You should be aware of them for a library your size. So we use that document also to kind of form our opinion through this process. So basically, the strategic plan is in two sections. The first section is dealing with what we call preparing for building the library of the future. And then the next section is the enhanced library services. We asked the consultants to do it that way because we felt like the plan, if we had to split it apart at some point, it could stand alone. So the building part of it could be something that we could move on and do what we needed to do, but the programs itself is a living document that the staff would need to go forward and enhance and bring back to us. I'm a firm believer that strategic plans should not be longer than a 3-year plan. I know that they end up morphing into 5, 6, 7, 10 years. I know that. But I think a 3-year plan, when you're going through the changes that we are as a community, is kind of a healthy goal. And so that's my opinion. The rest of the trustees may jump in and feel differently, but I think that if we look at some of the progress we've made already, that a 3-year plan does make a lot of sense. So,
No, we don't.
that's two. I've got one, thank you. I would just like to also say that, David, I so appreciate how you kicked that meeting off that day, because you brought clarity and charge, and I think it set the tone for that day, and it has set the tone going forward. You look at me like, what did I say? You basically said, guys, we've got 4 options, and here are the 4 options, and it's time for us to get serious about the library and what we need to do. I think it was 4, you said, do nothing. Which was one of the options you put out there. By the way, you made no stake that this is what we should do, is that we do nothing. We look at improving the existing facility. We form a partnership with someone else in the community, or we build one on our own, right? So is that 4? That's 4. And it really set the tone for the whole conversation that day. And what became pretty clear at some point in the afternoon is that do nothing was not an option. So we narrowed it down to 3 pretty quickly. So I think we all agree and that do nothing is not something that we want to do. So the consultants, the community, by the way, is very sensitive to, if we're going to do something, they want it to be pretty generic at this point. I'm sure you're surprised at that, right? So no one is willing to say we're going to remodel, we're going to abandon, we're going to build. Everyone wants us to start the process by saying that we all agree that we're going to enhance the library in some way, in some sort of facility. So what you'll see here in the plan is that we state that the library is about the community. It's an architectural brand, whether that's the existing building or a new facility. We feel that's really important to keep in mind. And we wanted to make sure that everyone in the community knew the new library, by the way, new meaning whatever that might be, will be a premier cultural institution and will be something that will be for generations ahead of, in the future, to look back and say, wow, I'm so glad that group of people made this decision to do this for the library. So let me stop there, because those three things were very critical to everyone we've heard from so far. And so is there a reaction from the 3 of you, or do you feel that we're on the right track here? Or I should say, how do you want to handle this? Do you want to give feedback as we go along, or do you want to wait till it's over, or is there any thoughts to that process?
And use your microphone.
I think we can get started with some comments and some reactions to it, and then just kind of work through the documents and the issues as we need to. I'll go first if you want me to. Okay, I kind of thought that was going to be the case. I think what you've got here is really good. And I like the way you have broken it into the 2 sections. I thought that was very strategic and appreciated. The points as you're walking through the process look good to me. Couple of areas where I got some more threshold reactions as opposed to specifics. A new library is going to, whether we simply remodel in the existing facility or build the building that I think all of us are dreaming of, any one of those decisions is in excess of $10 million. So we can't make those kinds of commitments without having City Council weighing in right at the very beginning regarding some threshold decisions as to how do we go about spending the money. And I think that starts to drive that first really important question of is it rehabilitation of the existing structure, rehabilitation and expansion, working in partnership with another government entity to develop a library, or building it on our own, either somewhere on or near the Sunrise Park site, or at some other location, including the possibility of downtown. And an awful lot of those initial discussions, I think you're helping to get us started, but council's going to have to make that decision. To the extent that any of it deals with real estate, and frankly, almost all of it deals with real estate, we have to first have that conversation in closed session around real estate transactions, which isn't where they will finish, but we at least have to have some of those in closed. So what I'm trying to figure out from my standpoint right now is how do we coordinate the processes that you have here with some of the decisions that City Council needs to make. So one recommendation I will make to you on page 2, and I may have the old version, where it says the trustees will establish a definition of role and responsibilities, recruit a building committee. I think that should be substituted. The trustees will recommend to City Council the establishment and then define. That gets us in the process, but it also keeps you very much in the loop because you're making the recommendations.
That makes sense.
If I can.
Sure.
Thank you. Just to echo Lisa's comments, I do think it's an excellent strategic plan. I think that you've done a really excellent job in the face of an uncertainty. It's hard to plan and have strategic planning when the future is so uncertain and when there are big decisions out in the air that we don't know yet. So I think that reflects actually a lot of certainty and a lot of action items from a place where we don't know some of those big decisions. But I agree with Lisa, so that was some of my main comments. I think Lisa's pointing to that second page. It says leadership. It's blue in the blue version. So I have the same comment. What's the role of the city council? And I saw that you noted in a number of places, like goal 1, number 1, it identifies the building committee, and there will be a representative from the foundation and the Friends, and it does that in a few places for different committees. So the question is, what's the role of the city council and the liaisons in that planning? So I just wanted to say I agree. That's a long-winded, I agree.
So you guys would feel better if we slant this towards the trustees are recommending this process to you guys, knowing that you may change it, but you may accept it. But the process that we're recommending has been basically aired through some of the community. So I think that as long as we say we're recommending, everyone understands that you guys have the authority ultimately to make those decisions. So I agree. So we can definitely update that so it reflects that.
At that building committee, it'll probably turn out to be appropriate to have an interesting mix of people that would include one or more individuals from city council, people like Marcus Fuller, who have such an exceptional background in building issues, would be very helpful. So we will certainly want to be consulting with Dr. Reddy as we start to also identify who would be good names for that, as well as I love the fact that you've got a commitment there to build committees that will also be out trying to help fundraise.
Yeah, and I guess it should go saying that this is so new to us. I mean, we've never done this before. So in talking to the consultants, we really asked, what do other communities do in this situation? So a lot of what you're seeing here was their recommendation on how to get organized. And honestly, the consultant said, sometimes you got to push, it's our role to push to the city, I'll just say the city right now, to make sure that this stays in front and we keep moving, right? In all due respect, though, I agree, we weren't trying to take over as much as just say, please take this on and let's do it.
But we're still trying to do it, so just to throw that in, we're not, if people, we want your input on all of these things, and if people from council want to do it, but it does mean being free to attend meetings, and that may be more likely staff than council members. So just, we're hoping to actually get this moving.
And going to your comment, Lisa, you all know that we requested that the existing funds that have been set aside in Measure J to be reallocated to actually give some funding to get the process started, and that was approved, as you guys know. Thank you for supporting that. So we felt that was important to put some money there so we can get it started.
That hasn't happened yet, though, so that only happened at the Measure J subcommittee. It didn't happen.
Oh, I'm sorry.
at
So
the city
the recommendation
council level,
was to
so we're-
approve, right?
We're still asking you.
Yeah.
Are you proposing to go back to library strategies to work with you, or are you going to reopen that to other firms to be considered?
Their commitment to us in their contract allows them to work with us through implementation of part
Okay.
of the plan. But when it comes to things like capital fundraising, those sort of things, they are experts. They would definitely love to, bid on that. But they know that their contract comes to an end at that certain point. So we would either talk to them or put them in the list and talk to others as well. So if that answers your question? Yeah.
The other thing that it would involve is bringing in, at some point, architects, even for the evaluation, and we would need help from you to expand the city list, since there aren't any historic preservation architects on that list, nor are there any library architects. And one of the things that we all thought is that if there is a new building, a competition, an architectural competition would be something that would be exciting and would raise the profile and help raise money. So how do one question is beginning to think about how we do some of the things we want to do and go through the city processes and get help with some expansions.
Is it possible to do an architectural competition? Have architects, if it were a new building, same thing might apply if we redo the existing building and add on, rather than just looking at a list or a group of architects looking at proposals and saying, yeah, we pick you.
Well, as a guide that might be helpful, as I recall, when we did the convention center expansion and remodel, there was that same kind of sentiment, let's have a competition. And what we did then, because as you can appreciate, there's a significant amount of work involved in that. So
Oh, yeah.
I think we took, and I've got to recall, was it four architects, and I think council agreed to pay each of them, I think, and I'm just thinking, was it $25,000 for them to come up with a conceptual, and then council did choose between which one they thought. So it certainly is possible, but I don't think they would do it for free.
No. I've worked with architects. I've built a lot of library buildings. They don't do anything for free.
Well, I think this document takes a whole different spin, not a different spin, a different slant. If we go through and, for example, the trustees will recommend a definition of the role and responsibilities of a building committee. So in other words, we're going to make a recommendation on what that committee should look like, make sure it represents the community. So we'll go through this and make sure that it's based on, here's what we see and we'd love for you guys to do.
Great.
That kind of makes sense for how we could reformat this pretty quickly, as a matter of fact. So if you definitely under the first goal, I've already started making notes here on how we can restructure some of these really important points to make them recommendations. And then under even goal 2, we can say, the trustees' recommendation on a building committee that will draft guiding principles. So we'll basically say that we suggest that's what that committee does. And of course, you guys can either accept or to modify that. So is that what you guys were thinking would make sense for the final document?
I think that-
Or final draft,
I think
I
that
should say,
works, yeah.
final draft.
Should we put something in there that makes it very clear that it's the city's final decision
Well, because-
on these issues?
Just for clarification, because they're both components. I guess the first is, what is the functions and the capacity of the library? You know, what's it gonna be inside? And then I guess the second question, then what does it look like? So is this to do both ultimately, or is this the first question of what are we gonna build, and then what is it gonna look like that we're gonna design?
The architects are suggesting that this building committee will take into account the program that has also been defined as part of this plan, and looking even beyond that, that would inform the building committee and the ultimate decisions, the city, on what that building should look like and how it should accommodate. For example, if we feel that we should have meeting room facilities for the community, that impacts a building immediately, right? So I think those are things in the program you will see that have been recommended from the input, so that would feed into this building committee as they shape their recommendations. Am I answering your question,
Because
David?
you essentially have that information now, don't you, of what it's going to be?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we have
No,
some.
No.
No?
Really?
No, the consultants said that, they just said we need to look at the library as the library that's going to last 40 years. What does it need that it might, does it have everything it needs right now? What are we going to need to transition into the future? And I thought they were talking with us about that, and that would also be with the committee.
And it might be the previous studies we had were focused heavily on that area, so that might be helpful in some way to pull those out and as part of the documents you look at.
It was assumed we would do that, as a matter of fact. Here's the thing that we want to avoid, ideally. This is before me, so staff, you gotta jump in here, or maybe Harry. I know that there's been a lot of time in the community spent talking about the library. People got real excited, got their hopes built up, and then nothing happened. We don't want to do that again unless we know something potentially is going to happen. So I think looking at that data first, informing ourselves, you know, is it relevant now, putting that into this plan, and then verifying that with the community as part of, we heard you, is this still true, sort of thing, instead of going out and saying, how would, this is me speaking here, right? Instead of us saying, what do you think about the library, or how would it look? I think people will scratch their heads and go, didn't you ask me that a few years ago, and has anything changed? So I think we've got to be careful, we don't want to come across as we ignored that information. Am I making sense on that? And I think that we want to make sure that we do go back to that data, because I think some of it's probably still relevant today.
I think so.
Do you,
I was just
right?
gonna, yes, I think so, especially the most recent study that we did, lots of good information about what people want. They want open spaces, they want comfortable seating, they want a place to park. All those things translate to today. I think also on this strategic plan, the second part, the enhanced library service, we can do these things while the building committee is doing their duty, which they will be us too, you know, we'll be doing it all as well. But when the building plan is happening, we will also be enhancing our library services in the same space that we're at. So some of those things, partnerships and enhancing our teen and tween areas, those things are things that we can do now. Some of it is tricky, like the study space. You know, there are some things that we need some assistance with, like the meeting spaces or study rooms. But partnerships and enhancing our tween and teen areas, those are things that we can do concurrently.
Ed, I'm not sure if this answers the question you were raising, but I think it was a really good one. I don't feel like we're starting over. We have done a tremendous amount of research. We've asked an awful lot of individuals. During the course of moving forward, we will need to do some check-ins to make sure, are we still on the right track? Is this still the appropriate direction? But that's a different context than what do you want?
I agree, thank you.
And to the extent that we're checking in, I like that, and I think that's appropriate.
Thank you. And so, I think then us going through and working with the consultant, Jeannie, to rephrase this is our recommendation to the city is something that I can take a stab at.
And if you want, we can, you can motion and approve that, and then we can just keep going forward with,
And I think that's a good idea.
so that it
And I
doesn't get
would
delayed.
make a motion that Ed do some revisions that reflect this conversation so that the board has taken action. And if you don't mind circulating with us before you forward it, but I think the point of view is we'd like to keep this moving forward and not stop and wait another month to make a few revisions. So that's my motion.
Do I have a
Second.
second? All in favor?
Aye.
So with that in mind, then maybe what we should do here is talk at a higher level on some of these recommendations that we've come up with. Is that okay? And that makes a lot more sense. So the plan comes about recommending that the city examine the three options that were identified. I'm on page 3, by the way. Renovating the current facility and looking at I call it our archive of building plans. I think we have several from the past that we might want to dust off and look at that we've paid for. Renovate and expand the current facility or build a new building on a selected site. Now, that third option could also include a partnership, so that's not limited to a new building. So
Yeah, I almost wonder, is that a 3A and 3B or a 3 and a 4? Because they're two very different approaches.
yeah, so I'll note that.
Okay.
Okay.
The ad hoc committee has had a preliminary conversation with a potential partner and no commitments, but it was a good first step
Okay.
and an overdue step in terms of seeing whether or not there's something that could work.
Okay. Then our goal 3, I think, probably starts to address a little bit of what you were talking about, David, where that committee with the city starts to create the vision of what this facility is going to look like and how it's going to function. Once we have a little more information about what are the potential. By the way, the plan was designed it could be independent from that. A lot of that conversation could be had without knowing if we're going to renovate or go to a new building. It's just starting to envision how the building's going to function and what it's going to have inside. So really, goal 3 is starting to, I think, inside out, kind of have some ideas on what we should do for the building. So that's where that fits in. Of course, we highly recommend community input. I know you guys know that. I will tell you that at the first reading where we had the Friends and the Foundation, there was members of the public representing the preservation and with concern over the current facility being abandoned or modified, not in keeping with its historical status. So I think that we all know that. So, and the way we address that is that no decisions have been made. That would all be incorporated in whatever discussion we have. But it was brought up pretty loud and clear. Would you guys agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
No.
No, it's
It
a
is
class 3, but what I was told when I told a member of the preservation community that it was a class 3, they said they could write a application to make it a class 1 and get it done in 6 months.
Yeah.
So that,
It was built in 1975, in case you want to know.
Well, and I don't want to forget the fact that the reason we're here today about and looking at these options is that we had 2 proposals in front of us saying how much it would cost. So we have an idea of what it would cost to renovate that building. That's when I raised my hand and said, if we're going to spend 13, 14, 15 million or more to renovate this building, we really should look at what are all the options before we spend that kind of money. I would hope that the community would agree with that, whether we stay there or we move on. I mean, I think that that's important. So I think there's data already that we've paid, that the city has paid for, correct, that we can call upon, right?
And
I think the other part of that is, may I, is that somehow we have to assure folks that if the library were to leave that building, the building would still be there and used for some other city purpose. And ensure that the fears that I've had a couple people say to me, well, if the library leaves, it'll be torn down. No, the building won't be torn down. And I think it's important to address that up front, rather than have that kind of in the back, pushing to stay in that building, because if we leave, something terrible is going to happen to it. Maybe that's too strong.
It's a public building. It is a building that was completed by one of this community's historic architects. I can't imagine a process of the library moving out that would not include someone moving into that facility that would be able to provide the restoration that the facility requires.
I've said that same thing to the people who said that to me.
So,
there, I mean, I think we're all aware that the straw vote at that meeting was fairly close in terms of stay and renovate, possibly expand or move. I think it was marginally more move, but not overwhelmingly. And everybody I've talked to reflects a different opinion about site location, whether that's a good site, whether other ones would be better, fears. And so we're aware of that, as well as enthusiasm for the best library we can have.
I don't want to jump ahead, but let me jump ahead.
I have a question, please.
Oh, sure.
Thank you. So you talked a little bit about community input, and I see that it's written here, and I see your first goal is creating an infrastructure. So my question is about how you're defining community input and setting up to get it, and to get it from the right places. I think the meeting in January was an amazing start, and I think there are still people we need to get input from. I think that this plan does an excellent job. For example, I love the idea of having a working group or advisory board. When we're talking about the library of the future and the next 40 years, we have to build it with teens and kids and families and the people who are using it. So I'm wondering if we need to better define what a community engagement will look like, or what that looks like. I'd wonder how many people came to that meeting, what time you held it at, what we did to get outreach from affected communities, those types of questions.
I'm going to look to, since we've done this before in the past, what process do we use for community input?
And I don't mean to put you on the spot, like, we don't have to define that here, but maybe in our document, if we want to think about and talk to the consultant about what that community input process would look like, so that we can define a rich and meaningful community input process that includes all the stakeholders for the library, including kids and teens. We talk about build with us, not for us, and we want to make sure that they're engaged in this process as well.
One thing that the consultants did say was that they didn't want to prescribe the methods. They wanted to keep it very open, so that if something works better in our community, they didn't want to have it documented. You have to do a phone interview, and we because I think that was even something that came up when we said, phone interviews don't really work anymore, and people don't have landlines, and people don't like to do surveys over the phone. And so we talked about that a little bit, and on page 3 it does say that we'll conduct a series of town meetings, and we did that at our last project. When we did that, we did town meetings. We did them at different times. We did them in the evenings. We had one specifically for teens. It was one of the best ones. They have such great ideas. They want a Scooby-Doo secret door, that kind of stuff. So we think that that's what our consultants told us, was that they didn't want to specify methodology. They wanted to just say that we would do it and then let us figure out the details. And we would be sensitive to all of that, especially, you know, we're the home of the working families, you know, we're open 2 nights a week, we're open on Saturdays. So, you know, we were trying to make those things available. Paper, you know, if we did a survey, we always try to do paper surveys or online, to make it available to anybody. So.
Yeah, and I
we
think
would- we
that's
would take care
great.
of
And
it.
so, you know, I like the idea of the town hall, and I don't think it should be super prescriptive, and maybe that will be a lot in the implementation plan for staff. I
That's
think
right.
that's right, but just in here, I heard a little bit that we've already got a lot of input, that people might feel like we're rehashing it. I actually don't think that's the case. I think that there are a lot of communities that we haven't yet engaged fully, and we need to do a better job as a city on that. And so just thinking about how that is, and then making sure we take the community input we get with a grain of salt, knowing that maybe there's other communities that haven't participated yet. We're working on that in every area that we do in the city. So I just wanted to flag that. Thank you.
What I could
I
do-
might add to that. One thing is, all those meetings shouldn't be at the library.
Right.
They should be out in those individual communities,
be-
because my experience is that people from some communities don't use the library because it doesn't speak to them. So you need to go to them in their neighborhood and have meetings and talk about what are their needs.
We had a good experience with the district committees going to the Filipino community, the Afro-American, the, trying to go to the schools, going to the Latino community, several different
Absolutely.
ways. And we reach different people, but we're also the library's doing an information that includes being on the bus stops or on the buses and giving information about the library. So I kind of say we, but the library staff has already worked through a really good public awareness campaign that's going to start in the fall.
I think what we could do is, because these consultants have worked in numerous communities in this area, maybe what we could, under number 4, is ask them to make some suggestions that have worked in other communities. And maybe it should say some suggestions might be, just to kind of give
Yeah.
us some things that have worked in other communities. Would that be something that you'd be interested in seeing? Okay. Number 4, going back to our conversation just a few minutes ago, I spent 10 years of my life working on a new library in the city of San Francisco, and I will tell you that part of my role was raising money. And one of the obstacles we had to deal with early on was the question, when we decided we were going to move to build a new building, what's going to happen with the old one? It, not only as a staff person, it was important to answer that question, but as a fundraiser it was, because people want to know, if they're giving money, where am I giving my money? I just say that from my own experience. I think the consultants would agree that that's going to be something that's going to come up pretty early on in this process. People are going to want to know, well, what are you doing? You know, where's my money going to go? So it is something that, you know, in those conversations I had back then was, when was the last time you were at the main library? I went there when I was a kid. Well, that was 50 years ago. If you've been there lately, you know, it's not quite the same facility. And guess what? That building became the Asian Art Museum, which is a fine museum on the West Coast. It's one of the most beautiful museums I've been in. And so the community, when they knew that, loved the idea, and they moved on. They were ready to give money and support a new building. So that's just an example.
How quickly in the process was it identified that it would be a museum, and then how quickly was it identified that it would be the Asian Art Museum?
Well, pretty typical. The Asian Art Museum was located in Golden Gate Park at the time, and it was falling down around, and the collection was really in jeopardy. But there had to be a lot of negotiation before they would agree to move to that building, because they had to raise money to renovate it, right? So we just couldn't go. We knew they were going to go there, but we couldn't announce it until they had agreed that they were going to do that. So I would say it was about a year and a half before we were able to say for sure that it was going to become a museum. But we were able to say that someone has been identified that's going to take that building over. And it helped to move the conversation on, instead of saying, because people were so afraid it would be empty and sit there as an eyesore, and, you know, you just had to address that. Does that answer your
Okay.
question?
That does, that's very,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
helpful.
Yeah. As you all may know, Harry and I represent the trustees on the foundation. We have been working with the foundation. We have actually doubled in size. We have 2 of our foundation members here in the audience with us, as a matter of fact. Our conversations are now focusing on fundraising and getting organized around fundraising. And the part of that where we will need some professional help, of course, to come in and do that. Every community does, so we know that. Putting some money aside to identify that consultant to come in and help us get organized around that. So you should know that that's a group of community leaders who've come together. We're still recruiting, by the way. And it's really a group that's excited now to know that we're making this progress. They know that we're gonna have to raise some money. And that will be something that you all will have to tell us how much. So there's thoughts and plans going into that process already. You have any questions about that, or?
No, that sounds good. I do have a couple of comments regarding some things that were in here that I recall from our conversation back in January. There was a lot of conversation around a museum aspect to the building. Museum that would be highlighting history of Palm Springs, and most specifically some of our communities that have not typically had their histories highlighted, from our African American to the Filipino to the Latino to the LGBT history of Palm Springs. And so I think that that's something that needs to be brought into the conversation fairly early on. Because it certainly has a tremendous impact on what the size of the building is going to need to be. And then, in a very different vein, there was conversation that came up in January that I thought was outstanding, that homeless individuals tend to use libraries. And rather than trying to push them away, more libraries are approaching that issue as this is an opportunity to reach out to the community, to establish connections, to provide services and provide connections to others. So I think that needs to be a part of the conversation that you have in planning from the start.
Many libraries actually partner with cities and counties and have people trained to work with homeless who are stationed at the library and can talk to these folks and work with them and get them housing, get them health, get them, whatever they need. So that's perfect.
Well, many communities use the library as an information and referral for all city services, as a matter of fact, or social services. And I think that's probably something we would want to look at as well, as a place for citizens to go and say, I need help with, how do I go about getting a building permit? Well, this is how. I mean, it's another information outlet that people don't think of.
And
So-
I would just like to add that we've done some of those projects, and we're eager to do it, and our barrier is the meeting space. We
Yep.
don't have the rooms. We've done SNAP signups for the WIC and the food stamp program. We've done that. We've done lawyers at the library. Some housing initiatives, and the food bank, and we've done a lot of partnerships, and we want to do the partnerships, but that's part of our goal, is for the library services, is to do the partnerships, but also to find space, and create some sort of meeting space. So we have some ideas on brainstorming ideas of how to create meeting spaces at the library, whether it's to take our, some of the things that are our archive that's in our library and move it into another, the annex building next door, or to find a space for it, and then the meeting spaces are already there. they're built in, they've got the light switches and the air conditioning, and the rooms are there. Or an alternative is to try to build some sort of new study rooms or new meeting spaces. But that has complications, you know, the air, like I said, the air conditioning and electricity and things like that. So it's just which one do we want to do and how can we do it? And we'd love to do it.
But, I mean, I think in the short run, when we get to the Prop J stuff, the decision really was that you were going to use the, it's not, the Fry
Fry.
building to help with that in the short term.
Okay.
But I don't know that that gives you the meeting spaces you need for the long term in the library. Not for the community.
Maybe, but then it depends on if that's a city goal. I know that was something that we talked about at our goal-setting session at the city, and we're not sure that that's a top priority for the city. It's a top priority for the library, but one of the top two. But, yeah, we have to look at that and see what we can do to help serve our community.
So, moving along, goal 4 and 5 are basically dealing with the actual capital campaign that the foundation will have to take on. And a lot of these suggestions were built from the consultants being actually fundraising consultants. So some of this came from them, and how we would go about getting organized. As a matter of fact, they would like to help us do that, so we would look at them as helping that as one option. Number 6 is the real need that we've also addressed already in some ways with some money that we've given the library from the trust fund, is to start building more visibility and awareness of the library. And that should morph into some sort of a communications committee that would, going forward, be responsible for communications about the library and the program and to help us build awareness. We're about to launch an awareness campaign about the library in this fall to just make people aware that we're there and what we can do. And that, I think, will feed into hearing more from the community. So we feel it's important to start that communication now, even if we don't know what we're going to do about a facility. It's starting to build awareness of the program. So I'll pause there. Were there any questions from you guys about any of those or any concerns? So
Can I ask you on number 5, the hiring the consulting firm to help with the fundraising and feasibility, what's your time frame in planning to do that? More upfront now, or is that later?
So I guess the question on that would be, when we went about doing this process, we were instructed that this had to be a city process. If the foundation is going to do that process, are we tied to, we're not tied to any city process at that point, correct? I mean, that's, and I'll answer your
No,
question.
correct, in terms of like the procurement formalities. So
Correct.
you want to hire, that would be correct. You can
Okay.
do that on your own.
So the foundation really has been kind of waiting to hear that officially. If we can take that on ourselves, I think that we're ready to start moving in that direction as soon as possible, because we have a lot of work to do to get ready. Ideally, when you guys look at I'm putting my foundation hat on. When you look at the foundation and say, okay, guys, we need you to raise blah, we've already started. We already have some commitments so that we can say we're on our way. So I think that we need to start getting that organized as soon as possible. Do you not agree? I mean, I think that's something we need to start now. Yeah.
Yes.
Foundation's a 501c.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
I think that makes perfect sense
Yeah.
for the foundation to be responsible.
One of the issues, however, as part of that is naming rights. Who's gonna, I mean, if Mr. X says, I'll give you $5 million, but I want my name on the building, who, I mean, that
Yeah, right,
decision.
now that would be more of a council decision, but
Yes,
that would be a good problem to have. We certainly
Wouldn't
would
it?
get that in front of council with some alacrity.
And I think it's,
Because the foundation, I've done this, building libraries, the foundation can come up with, here are naming opportunities. You give $5 million and maybe we can name the building after you, but
And I
that can
think-
only be approved by
Well,
council.
what might be, once you, as you say, you're getting a sense from what the community, it's possible out there, like make a recommendation to council that certain naming rights and certain naming things at these levels and make that to council, and council could then formalize that.
Excellent.
That's very common.
That's perfect.
That's probably the more common way of doing it.
Yeah.
So I would say that the part of the consultant for fundraising would identify these kinds of issues for us, David, that we'd probably need to get you guys to have input on, but that could be one of them. I know in San Francisco, we had a compact, is that for lack of a better term, with the city and the foundation that identified some of those things when we kicked in the fundraising, so that we knew what we could do and what the city was expecting and what had to be approved.
It's a good model.
Yeah.
I agree.
And so these consultants definitely could help us, create that process for us. I think we'd have to have that for that purpose. Yeah.
I think I misspoke when I said that the request to Prop J for the money that had already been allocated still needed to go to council. On that 700,000, what Marcus told us was that Prop J could reallocate it the way we wanted to after they approved it, because it had been previously allocated and set aside. Is that correct?
No, I mean, it's there now. It's just sort of sitting there. It was allocated for.
In previous years.
For however you want to use it ultimately, but it could be, council could repurpose that if you have a suggestion. But that's, as you know, if, presumably whatever the city's participation is going to be would come from Measure J, so that obviously will be significantly increased, would have to be. And presumably what that would be is in the terms of, and this is one of the things that we've got to get our arms around, is what is the city able to contribute in terms of the capacity of Measure J to do a bond? So for example, Measure J runs out in 2037. And so a 17-year, what can we do in a bond capacity versus, the bond would be X amount versus a longer time frame when potentially the general fund would have to then kick in. So I think that's a critical question, is how much on an annual basis would council be willing to contribute towards a bond? Is it, that get us 50% there, et cetera? So I think that's needs to be part of the equation. But to answer your question specifically, Kathy, yeah, that money is sitting there. It can, there's no specific set purpose for it, but it's just earmarked for the library.
And I guess my question was, let's see if the total amount was 623.83. This was this little thing. What Marcus told us was that it had already been allocated, and that Measure J's decision on this particular money didn't have to go to council, but he would be able to implement this. He said that at Measure J, so I just wanted to make sure that was correct.
Right. You're speaking about, right, that's there. You're speaking about the J.C. Fry building as well?
It's the Fry building, yeah. It would be implemented through him, obviously, because any contracts we would have for that building.
Right, so those would go to council. The contracts would go to council.
He said the contracts
Yeah.
would go to council, but not necessarily the decision on these funds.
That's one possibility.
So, okay,
Once
I
the
just
larger
wanted
global
to,
picture starts to come into a little more clarity, council may want to modify that in some way, but it's earmarked for the library
well,
currently.
I might be moving ahead if I ask these questions, but since you've raised it as bonding capacity, at Measure J this time, they had originally set aside $5 million for the library, but then realizing that they wouldn't be able to do the repairs now because this decision hadn't been made, they recommended reauthorizing that money to some other projects, but holding $1.2 million toward the library. And one question is, and it's long-term for me, is there a dollar amount that the council would be willing to set aside for a future number of years, so we would know that there's some Prop J money coming for either renovating this building or doing a new building?
well, in my estimation, that's the only way really the city could participate, so that, yes, council will have to figure out what that number is.
Yes.
And make a commitment to it if it's gonna proceed that way, yes.
That's what we're discussing, and when Measure J funding comes to city council, that's an issue that we're discussing, and I will ask that question.
Because I think, this is just me, I don't think that with fundraising, we can anticipate, I could be being cautious, I can't anticipate that unless there's a Measure J contribution to it and some expectation, that it would be easy to kickstart it without any of that. That's,
Are you saying that you don't think that a capital campaign could be started without knowing that amount? Is that what
I
you're
think
saying?
it couldn't be started without knowing the city's commitment to doing something. And what, and that's all I'm saying is that people are going to ask, this is a city building, it's in disrepair, what is the city going to be doing in this? And we know it's going to cost more, but if we're putting money into it, what is the city doing?
It's a fair
We
question.
understand.
It's a fair question. Yep.
And so I kind of rudely just putting it on the table.
I don't have the dollar to answer.
However, I do think that we could have some preliminary conversations with members of this community to let them know that we're moving towards some sort of enhanced library services. Would they be interested in contributing to that? And I think we could start that conversation.
And you could say, the city is committed to some Measure J money. We don't know how much.
But knowing, we would need to know, it would be very helpful to know some of that.
But wouldn't argue.
Can I just ask a question about bonds? Does it make a difference, the bond amount on whether it's a renovation or a new library? I mean, you can still bond on the renovation. I wasn't sure. Okay.
But how many years can you bond? That's,
Well, there's about 17 years left on Measure J.
Right.
Now, we could bond further than that, but then
the city would have to
then
pick
pick
it
it up
up.
if Measure J is not renewed.
Okay. We're ready to build, aren't we? Ready to do something. We're getting
We're ready
excited
to
to get
build.
off track here. So getting us back. So the first part of the plan, I think that we've gone through, and I hear loud and clear that we need to go back and make this more of a recommendation to you all. So we'll tweak that and submit it back to you for review. The second half of the plan, just so you, is beginning to pick up some of the topics that came out of that day-long meeting. We heard loud and clear, adult literacy is a priority. So staff is looking at how to build an adult literacy program and partner with someone in the community. So we're trying to check some of these things off sooner rather than later, because the trustees feel very strongly that we can show some momentum to the community that we're about to go and ask for support in some way. And so we're looking at our existing resources, by the way, on how we can make these things happen. And also working closely with early childhood education in the community. I think we've made contacts already with that. And also starting to engage the LGBTQ youth and trying to figure out how we can start building programs that ultimately will shape what we might see in a revised main library. One of the things, of course, that's very important to us in Goal 2 is engaging teens. We've already talked about that, and how can we engage them and have an advisory board. So staff is looking at that at this point. I think that's the most exciting, one of the most exciting things that we have. One of the things that we have heard over and over, and I'm sure you guys hear this too, is we have no place to meet as a community. So as part of the Measure J request, we have come up with a recommendation that would allow us to use some existing rooms in the current building without making any modifications, just moving things out, asking the Friends to buy furniture to go in there, like, meeting tables and chairs, that we could almost pretty quickly provide two meeting rooms, maybe 3 in our current facility. It would mean that we would need to move those programs into our annex. So that's why we were talking about the Fry building being an opportunity for us to move into that. So, again, using some existing resources. I think that would make a huge impact and statement to the community if we now say we have places you can meet, and here's some great facilities. Classroom size, by the way, is one of them, and the other one is kind of a boardroom size, so it would provide all kinds of meeting spaces for us.
If I can, I have a question on goal 1.
Yeah.
So I see that it says the goals and strategies for the enhanced library service were informed by the discussion at January's planning retreat, library usage data, and city demographic data. Can you tell me a little bit more about how we picked adult literacy, childhood education, early childhood education, and LGBT community or youth as those 3 main needs for enhanced library services?
I would say that those really came from the breakout sessions that we had at the retreat. Those were the things that really came out of that, from my experience, when the sessions that I was in, and it was just, the people who were there were very vocal about those groups, and they were very participatory. So we had the Head Start school. We had a lot of people from the school district there, so that was nice, and we did have people from Head Start, and then the different LGBTQ communities were there, and so they just came out. From what I understand, that's helped me.
Yes.
here,
And
'cause
adult literacy has, from what I've heard as a newcomer, has always been a priority of the Friends of the library, is to enhance and have an adult literacy program and staff.
Some of it was historical in the programs we had in the past that were done away with for various reasons. And so when we had a literacy program and we had early childhood at the library, those programs were existing in the past, and now they want to try to bring them back.
Did we look at data for library usage, like what's increasing, what the demand is, things like that?
I know that the consultants did look at a lot of data. They asked us for many years of statistics and usage. And so I think that when you see information about tweens, that was something that came from the consultants and their research and the statistics of
Okay,
what's
that's helpful.
happening at the library.
Okay, thank you.
And I would also add to that the consultants tried to identify similar communities in size and demographics to say, these are some trends in libraries that we're seeing in other communities that we need to be aware of and inform us about those. Now, these were things that we decided we wanted to do, but there's still a list. They have a list of things that they think that we should be looking at. Does that answer your question?
They did talk about the tween program, of there being a teen room and then a children's room, but no real place and location for tween children to utilize the library in the best possible way. And it was their concern that the children's room wasn't sufficient for that and there was no other space.
Also in our list, as a matter of fact, on goal 4, is the library collection. And as a librarian, the library collection is one of our best assets in the city. I mean, when we think about that being an asset, and it constantly needs to be fed and taken care of. And the consultants definitely are suggesting that it needs to be reviewed, it needs to be current for a public library, so we felt that was important to include here. It also educates you all as decision makers. When budgets come before you and you see that we want to spend so much money on books, well, this is what we're spending that money for, and it's based on usage and demand from the community. And there's a whole process in library science on how you maintain and feed a collection. And then the communications we've talked about, the trustees have given staff a budget or some money from the trust fund to create an awareness program. And I will say they've come back with an amazing program for the money. So we're going to start putting out bus signs and using the buses and using outdoor areas to talk about the library and create a program around that. So we're trying to meet that goal right up front and kind of coincide with the fact that we're going to start talking about fundraising at the same time. So And finally, the consultants are on go. They're ready. They're ready to do some of the implementation on the second half of the plan, and we've put them on hold pending this meeting and seeing if there's any feedback from you all. So once we get this back to you guys, they're ready to come on site and work with staff to start working on the implementation and outlining how we get to these things. They're not doing it now because I said you guys may have other ideas, or you may have something else you want to do.
You don't need authority from us to begin that process.
Just in case there was something we had forgotten, that you guys said you've
Well, they
heard
brought
from your
up-
own
They brought up
constituents.
some good points that
Yeah.
is gonna enhance the process.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know you guys have other meetings possibly, so I'll try to get moving on. Any other questions about the strategic plan? We've got, I think, our charge from you guys, so we'll turn that around pretty quickly and get that back so that we can keep things moving, if that's okay with you all.
I think our next step, once it's all finalized, is to bring it to the full council for their
For
approval.
approval.
This was very good progress.
Thank you. We wanted just to briefly, and I think we've talked about some of these
Yeah,
things.
we've already talked.
On 2B, but just to go through is, there is question on our part on how we're going to do the implementation of the plan in general, but particularly the services. So it looks like that we can maybe tweak this a little bit and give the consultants the green light to start working on the implementation of services. We assume that when it comes to the consultants and the architects and feasibility studies, that's a process that you guys will follow, or the city will follow. And we just wanted to confirm that the trustees will hand this over to you, and whatever support we have to give, you'll ask us, of course. But I know we've served on those committees as part of the review process, but just wanted to highlight that. We've cleared up that we'll make a recommendation on that building committee and maybe what it should look like to you all for your review.
But it would be helpful if you have suggestions as well to us and people you want to include.
I don't want to do that right now.
No, we,
Yeah,
No, I'm assuming that you may have thoughts about that.
of course, the city staff involvement in the process, we always assume that once we finalize this plan, paid for, give to you guys, that any implementation that would involve staff or trustees, we're open to that and would go by your direction on that.
And who do we work with?
Oh,
With
me first.
regard to,
Oh, me, but then if
Consultants
it's
and
possi-
selections of consultants and those kinds of, and
well,
lists.
to the extent that the foundation wants to do it, basically you just pick and we would proceed potentially to, well, there's a couple ways that we would proceed to do a contract. I mean, you could just do it yourselves. I presume you'd want some staff help to assist. We could do it through our procurement department
And if-
and the attorney.
If we were doing a contract for the building committee, which isn't the foundation, and it would be a contract with architects or with consultants, and it's utilizing either the foundation money or the trustees' money or the Prop J money, how do we work that?
I'm not sure the
That would
question.
go
If it's
It would go
any
through
They go through
city
the Public
dollars,
Works.
it would go through the whole
City.
Public Works formal procurement process. If, what my sense you're saying, if you want to just, you said, do some sort of preliminary work with foundation dollars, you could do that outside of the procurement process.
But if we're utilizing any of the 300,000 in the Prop J money.
That would be formal, that would
It's
be formal
formal
process,
procurement
yes.
process,
Yes.
and that would be going through Marcus and Jeannie? or-
Well, Jeannie will keep me in the loop, and it'll be my responsibility to move that through the process, so you have the outcome and the outputs that you need in a timely manner. I think it's best to have me involved in that,
Yeah.
but start through Jeannie for sure,
Okay.
certain. And I likely would have Marcus play a key role in this.
The Library Foundation will take this topic at our next board meeting and discuss how we want to get organized around identifying a consultant to come in with the capital campaign. And so that process would work
yeah.
through the foundation. Are you saying that if we wanted to utilize city services, we could, or should we do that independently of of the city.
Well, it's a question, I don't, does the foundation sign agreements and contracts? I don't know if they
We
have in the
can.
past.
It can.
If it
We
can,
can.
then that makes it simpler if you.
It's
to
a
the extent you need some staff
501c3
support,
corporation,
We're happy
so,
to,
yeah.
but you certainly could do that on your own.
They could, but I think that we might be talking about two separate projects. Excuse
Yeah.
me, if we're talking about the, what's the, well, not the fundraising, but I'm talking about like we had the consultants come in before and feasibility studies and
That's really
trying
what
to,
I was
trying to
asking about.
determine, that's what I thought. If we're trying to determine, stay where we are, go get a new building. Do we, if we have to hire a
That's not a
consultant for
foundation
that,
duty, though.
Okay,
No.
but,
that would be a city
That would be
function.
a
The
city
Yes.
foundation
Yeah.
is the fundraiser, but the consultants to help determine this building or a new building, those kinds of questions are city functions.
Our city
I'd say that's
corrections.
a council question, and you're right. So
Yeah.
before a consultant looked at that, I think the city council would need to weigh in
Yep.
if in fact that's what they even wanted. One thing that might be helpful is if we think in terms of what is the structure of this decision to actually decide, are we renovating, building new, and where? So I think trying to frame this, if we look 30, 60, 90 days down the road, and you're gonna have this discussion with council to try to get them to make some initial decisions on it, what is it that we as staff and you as the board need to do to get them enough information to make that decision? So I think that's what I'm trying to think in terms of, so we formally can move to the next, at least the next phase.
Agree.
I guess I'm confused because I thought we needed some consultants to get us to that decision for council as to new building or renovating, dollar amounts and other issues.
Well, maybe more specifics at some point, that might be helpful, but generally, conceptually, I don't know how they can help, because they're not gonna be able to identify locations.
No.
And the structure of this decision is, well, how much is it gonna cost? Where is it? And how much can we afford? And then that will inform how much we have to raise and which way we're going. So in my mind, that's what information does city council need to make those decisions?
And that's what I thought we had in mind in recommending the library planning of the existing funds that we have allocated of $125,000 to go towards that from Measure J to start that process. Is that how we would
Well,
do
and
it?
again, I don't want to get up in front of the city, they're the decision maker, but as we're moving through the budget process now, they're gonna look at Measure J, and I think they're gonna wanna have that discussion that if you, long-term with Measure J, this is what we're getting in revenue, this is what's earmarked and committed so far, this is what we have left over, and of this what's left over, maybe we ought to think about X towards library long-term. Once they think about that and give us some direction, then we'll know a better idea of how much of a bond we can sustain. And we know a new building is gonna be 30 to 40 million, probably. A renovation is 15 to 20. And so once we figure out how much we have to put into it, and then once you sort of figure out what you think we can raise privately, now we've got potentially enough information to start to make a decision on what.
Yeah.
And hopefully in this next 30, 60, 90 days, we're gonna also then, as a companion corollary, have a better idea of what potential other sites are. So again, that comes down to, is it, how many months in the future will we be prepared and able to bring to council enough information for them to make
Make a
these
decision.
decisions? And my
That makes
sense
sense.
is, it's going to be a series of decisions, and so maybe we ought to think about what is the first small bite at the apple,
Yeah.
so to speak, and get that in front of them. But I do think that they will be having some discussions on Measure J as we move through the budget process over the next 30 days.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
One of the, and I agree completely with what David said, but at some point in time, and I'm going to say this like it's simple, it's actually quite complex. We're going to have to be looking at what's the cost and what are the benefits of each one of the options, and which one can we afford? Which one gets us inspired to find the money to spend that? So, and all of these options have some different benefit features to them.
Well, we're 8 minutes from running out of time, and we have 3 items left. But I think, once again, we pretty much have discussed these. The city contributions to support the plan, I think we probably need to come back to that once we rephrase this for you guys and you give us some more feedback. Would you not agree? I mean, I think that it's probably a little too early to jump to that particular
But
topic just
maybe
yet.
we can talk about the Measure J.
The Measure J request, we've been talking about, we do have a copy of what has gone to the Measure J subcommittee. And Jeannie has recently shared with us her library, the library budget that I think is before you all now. So, and I assume that hasn't been approved?
No, not yet.
So on the Measure J, as we've talked about, there was a formal proposal from, actually, let me back up real quickly. Measure J subcommittee has been before us 3 times, and each time they've asked us, they said, there's some money that's been approved for the library, and you need to tell us if you want to use it, or we're going to reallocate it, right? Because you guys all want to keep that money flowing. So we discussed it, and we came back with a recommendation that said we'd like to reallocate that towards library planning and also addressing that, refreshing the annex so that we can hit some of our current goals. So I think that those are the 2 items that have been proposed, and I'm sorry, I wasn't at that meeting.
I was at the meeting. Because they asked us about reallocation, so we took this there, they took this there, and they approved this unanimously. And I was a little confused because Marcus, because I thought it was old money in a discussion after the meeting with Marcus. But this is something that we do want to do now. We want to refresh that building, move over some of your archives and some of the copying machines that take up space in the library, rather than trying to cut a few rooms in the library itself and dealing with failed plumbing and air conditioning that doesn't work all the way across, and working with all those systems and building walls. We thought it would be much better just to have some of the spaces freed up and be able to use the annex building for some additional services as well. It would allow, I think, for at least 1 additional classroom or space. It would allow for moving those services, and it would allow the Friends of the Library to have a store for their book sales.
Quick question, is that a fairly comfortable assessment of the 300,000 for the 5
We don't
building? or
know.
It's just a guess at this point?
We are not sure.
Okay, so. that
We
would-
have no idea at this point, because we were asked to come up with something regarding that. Marcus, in his original, he had that building on the list of 27 options. He had a lower budget amount, but I don't know what that came from. The interior of the building, the exterior looks like it's in great shape. The bathrooms have been pulled out.
It's about 3,200 square feet total.
And it would need new walls, new floors, and it might need new air, I don't know what
Needs
the air
everything.
conditioning, we don't
Needs
know, we
everything.
don't know the services, but it would need to be cleaned up and the interior rebuilt to be usable. So that,
So this process now would be that this request makes its way to the Measure J committee, then ultimately.
Right, it'll be a recommendation to
It's-
city council.
it's
Okay,
been a
okay.
recommendation. The other thing they were looking at was the $8 or $11 million, because they had some extra money in terms of what they would recommend to city council from this year's allocation. In that, they also allotted money for the library, and it wasn't defined whether it was old building, new building, restore some portions of the building or whether it would be used in the future. But they were setting aside, recommending setting aside money for the library. And that would be part of the recommendation they'll be making to the council.
Any questions about that?
And what Marcus
process?
said was to do some sketching of what we wanted, and he would put together a contract for the Fry building, to basically look and see what needed to be done and what, some estimates on cost.
And I would look to you as the final, about the budget. Can you speak to that?
I'll sum it up in one sentence. We would like your support.
Yeah.
I think that's it, yeah.
Yeah, the only one position I think that was in there is, and it may be for the benefit of the subcommittee, it's a part-time position that does the passport. I was
Passports.
not certain that that's something that we would want to do, given you have all your other responsibilities. Jeannie has made the case that obviously there's a need in the community, and second of all, that it would pay for itself. So I don't know if you want to just briefly
Yes.
mention that.
I've done some research. We were actually the first library in the United States to do passports. And the service, when the economic downturn happened, it was discontinued because there just wasn't the staff to do it. And so I reached out to some neighboring libraries that do it, and they are bringing in a lot of money on this. They're very busy, though. It's a super popular service. They cannot keep up with the demand at the libraries, even though their local post offices do passports. But my research indicates that our local post offices do passports only Monday through Friday, 9 to 3 or 10 to 3. And so there are working families who can't go to the post office or have to take time off work. We're open 2 nights a week. We're open on Saturdays. And so I think this would be a good start for us. We would obviously have to train other staff, and I think we could do this and just do it as a pilot, try it out, see how it goes. I'm certain that it will pay for itself. The revenue stream that the other libraries are bringing in are 6 figures. I mean, they're bringing in $200,000, $300,000 a year in passport revenue. It's surprising. And then we would love to also offer passport photos, and I think that one way to help with the library to improve library services is to keep the passport photo income into the library. Give that to the Friends, let the Friends run that portion of it. You don't have to be licensed or certified with the State Department to do the photos. And then the rest of the revenue would come into the general fund. And so it'd be a great service for the community to have. And libraries are doing all kinds of things. They're putting in DMV kiosks. It's crazy, the things that I'm hearing that libraries are doing now. So we're there for our community. Great space.
Yeah, that's something that's
Going to have to be decided by as part of the budget process.
Yep.
But I'd encourage you to make the case for it.
Yeah.
We wanted to do a commercial just for that. Well, we thank you guys for your time, as always. You're wonderful partners. We so appreciate this feedback. And we'll take it and we'll update, send it back for you guys to look at. And as I said, starting out, this is a document, it's a living document. And if we want it to meet your expectations, because you're like us out in the community defending it or talking about it. So we will get this back to you ASAP. I'll meet with the consultants tomorrow, as a matter of fact.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment. Thank you for all your work. I know I said this at the beginning, but I think that this is a leadership issue, actually, just making a decision as a community and moving forward and building momentum and creating a plan to do so. And you're doing that work. And so please keep it up and keep it going and keep up the momentum, because that's what's going to get us there. Because it's a leadership moment, because it's easier to do nothing sometimes politically than it is to, especially when we have so many options. It's just hard. There's like analysis paralysis sometimes. So I just want to applaud you for, moving forward even in the face of uncertainty. And I think that's what we need together. And then we can all build the momentum to get there and make a decision as a community.
Thank you. I mean, the
Thank
good
you.
part about this is that there's not a person I talk to about, when they ask me what I do at the library, that doesn't say, oh, wouldn't it be great to have a library? I mean, everybody loves the library. There's nobody saying, oh, don't spend your time with the library. So I think that that's really helping us a lot.
Oh, there's bound to
Oh,
be
yeah.
others too.
I
And I'm working on him.
know one too.
Can I ask for a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
We stand adjourned. Thank you.